Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, narrated by Disney or Lucasfilm, whichever way you slice it. Legends. So there are a couple things I think I forgot to mention, and if they're a repeat, I apologize for repeating myself. But just in case I didn't, and maybe around the same time frame anyway. But in Star Wars Tales number 15, there's a little short comic called First Impressions. And basically, this is, 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, before Episode 4. And a younger Leia is being taken with Bail Organa to Coruscant, to the Imperial Center, to visit Palpatine. Well, not Palpatine specifically, but to attend an event. Because up until Episode 4, of course, we have that whole scene on the Death Star with the Imperials talking where the Senate has finally been disbanded. But as of right now, the Senate is still, this illusionary, you know, part in politics until by Episode 4, Palpatine just gets rid of the facade and says, "No, I'm the sole person in charge. I don't need no senators to help me make decisions." And so they're just checking it out, and she sees she's super impressed with Coruscant and everything, but then she also sees how aliens are treated on Coruscant and everything, and she gets upset about that. It's a very small story. It's not good. It's not bad. I want to stress those. It's like it's perfectly fine. You're just you won't remember it after you've read enough. You'll forget about it shortly after. But yeah, it's an okay little story. Um, Also, a big thing, if I didn't mention it before, was in Dig magazine from 1999. There was a short story called Lost City of Tatooine by Nathan Walker. Now, the Dig magazine was just a magazine that I think for the most part was usually nonfiction, which just focused on archaeology and stuff. Especially because back in 1999, Jurassic Park was really big at the time. And so they just decided. I mean, this is the crazy thing about the olden days of Lucasfilm, because they were approved to just go and make a story set in the Star Wars universe. So it's also 3 years before the Battle of Yavin. Luke and Biggs are just exploring the desert when they come across an ancient like village or something, a civilization, until they realize that it's the Sand People, and that when people started settling on Tatooine, they got driven out and had to become nomadic. It's a very little story, but it's pretty decent for literally being in a magazine about archaeology. Um, and I imagine finding that actual magazine would be really difficult, but you can find this particular story fairly easily on the internet if you just look for a little bit. So I do recommend it though, because it's pretty decent. And now on to the discussion of our video today. The 1985 series Droids. Um, I don't really have much to talk about. I am going to mention overall what the general arcs are for each section, cool parts, and then the second half of the video, of course, will be the comics that are in the same art style that continue the droid story. Starting with Droids episodes 1 through 4, which are White Witch, Escape into Terror, Trigon Unleashed, and A Race to the Finish. So, again, in the 90s, in the 90s Droids comics, which were made by Dark Horse, that came out later on, whoever they originally were with, because of course the prequels didn't exist yet, really, but whoever the droids were originally with, they get lost away from them, and they, find some new owners, and the new owners are with them for a little bit, until, they go on their way to do other adventures, and they get new owners, and then they lose an owner, and then they're on their own for a bit, and then we left them, and when we come back to them here in the story, they find some new masters. This kid, who's a relatively good guy, and the villains of this 4 arc series is like this gang a smaller gang compared to Jabba the Hutt and all of his goons or Black Sun or anything, but they're doing stuff and meddling with these kids, so the droids help them out, of course. Um, one moment, please. I apologize. Apologies. One of the cool parts was that in episode 4, we got Boba Fett. Boba Fett showed up for for an episode, and he looked like how he looked like in that animated part of the holiday special. And it's fun to see Boba Fett, and he does his Boba Fett stuff. And in this little '80s cartoon, he's more like Boba Fett than other stuff. And then moving forward, by the end of it, I forget exactly what happens, but I think this kid wants to join some sort of school or something, but they won't allow droids. But they care more about C3PO and R2D2 because those droids are their friends. They're more important than their education, I guess. But R2D2 and C3PO overhear that, and they don't want them to sacrifice a bright future for themselves because of them. So they leave in an escape pod right as they're about to jump in the hyperspace, so they won't be able to come back for them. And they're just left stranded in space, really, until we see them in this next arc. But that was a really heartwarming little ending. It's cheesy, but it was nice. With episodes 5 through 8, the next big arc, which is it's let's say 5 through 9, which is the Lost Prince, the New King, Pirates of Tengaroo, The Revenge of Kybo Ren, and Kobe and the Star Hunters. So we start off with the droids in a 50s diner of all things with a 4-armed alien. Not the same, it's not Dexter, but it is in the same similar vein of it's a 50s looking diner on the place. And of course, they find some new owners because there's an auction for droids. And this new guy takes C3PO and R2D2 and this other android looking thing till they come back home and realize that it's actually a person. And so the person works with them, gets healed up, remembers who they are, and they turn out to be a lost prince of this, like planet or whatever. So they go to bring him back there. But as they try to go back there, problems ensue with political manipulations. It's not very deep because it's from the 80s, but some dude wants to be the king and not have it be the prince dude. I will say, the Lost Prince episode, the new owner for R2D2 and C3PO, what is he writing? Oh, but of course, he's writing the wheel bike thing from episode 3. Yeah, the thing that Grievous rides when he's fighting Obi-Wan. That makes a thing. So George Lucas saw this cartoon, helped work on this cartoon, by the way. So if we're going to say that TCW gets to be in the Disney canon, then why isn't Droids? Because George Lucas also helped with this, if not more so than he did with TCW. But anyway, so he put that into his movies, and you'll see a bunch of that. I'm going to share a clip, a portion of Matt Wilkins' video on the connections within the EU, just because I can't say it any better than he can. But yeah, I'll leave a link because it's a video that talks about droids and Ewoks, so I'll just let you watch his thoughts on all of it in the description below. But yeah, after that, we're still following the same team. He does, the owner to the droids does meet up this black girl named Jessica, and she's really cool. And I 80s and 90s were the golden age of everything in terms of maybe things weren't so perfect. I'm sure they weren't. Nothing ever was, but we were in a consensus within, the world, at least generally. Sure, there are outliers, there are racist everywhere, and I wouldn't bring this up usually, but with all the stuff we get today, it's nice to just have a character appear in a show and they're just them. And there's no, oh, look at me, I'm so much lesser because I'm brown or this or that, with it. Like every TV show feels the need to do now. She's there and she's cool. She's a woman first, so oh, a woman didn't have rights in the 80s, da da da, you know. And she's a person of color. And yet she is, I mean, she's not like, the coolest person doing everything. That then I'd have a problem. But she is competent. She helps out. But yeah, Jessica's really cool. And so they get attacked by pirates at one point, and the leader of these pirates is a guy named Kaibo Ren. There's no way there's not a connection there because it is too similar. So that was the episodes with Kaibo Ren were a lot of fun. I really enjoyed those. I will say, also, for those of you who have not seen this show, you can find it on Disney Plus in this like Star Wars Vintage collection section. But Anthony Daniels, the voice of C-3PO, does return to do the voice of C-3PO in the show, which is always nice. Kobe and the Star Hunters kind of just shows how, of course, by the end of it, that the droids leave their master that they've had because he has gotten accepted into the Imperial Academy. And they also don't allow droids. So they leave to go wandering around. And then a special that was made actually in 1986, but chronologically takes place here, which is actually the most important thing I'm going to talk about today, is the Great Heap. Now, why does the Great Heap matter? Well, because the Great Heap himself later found out in the Essential Guide to Droids book is that we find out that the two warring factions, the two warring robot species that caused all-out war amongst the galaxy, in a different galaxy than the Star Wars galaxy, mind you, that basically tore the galaxy apart, was the same galaxy that the Vong come from. And those two races were known as the Silentium and the Abenor. And the Silentium, if you remember when I reviewed the Lando Calrissian trilogy by L. Neil Smith, we found out that Vufi Ra is actually connected to those beings. Those beings were more of observers. They like to gather data and stuff, whereas the Abenor, the same thing that the Great Heap is in that Droids episode. And we also find out from that book that the Great Heap in the Droids episode is actually small in comparison to the ones that destroyed the Vong's galaxy, which were planet-sized. And they had an all-out war with the Silentium, which caused massive devastation everywhere. We have very vague things about the history of the Vong, but the Vong were in the middle of all this, and they eventually fought back against both of them. But by the time we see them in New Jedi Order, the Vong despise technology, and that's because of these two ancient droid races, and why they become so technophobic, why they become, the Vong as we know them, the self-mutilating, technology-hating beings that they are. And their galaxy's pretty much gone, so they need to come to a new galaxy and take it over. So this is a deep cut in Star Wars EU lore. Of course, when they made this episode, the Vong didn't exist. But as the EU always does, you make connections, you make illustrations, and help connect everything to being one consistent whole. So now we have this Great Heap episode where we have this big giant, robot guy, and we now have this super interesting backstory to his entire species, and the fact that he's a small version of galaxy or planet-sized versions of that same thing, and also way less rusty. Like, man, that would be crazy to explore, wouldn't it? See, even that alone. Imagine if they made just a trilogy revolving, like a book revolving around the history of the Vong. How interesting would that be? Right? Are you not intrigued? But the episode itself is fairly fine. It's actually it's almost an hour long. It's 49 minutes, so it's a special. But this is also where we get introduced to the new master that C-3PO and R2-D2 would have for the remainder of the series. Bob Bobador. I don't know what the frick to say his name, but apparently EU writers like him so much that they try to reference him elsewhere, like in the Shadows of the Empire source book. He's mentioned there for some reason, but people seem to really enjoy this cartoon, so that is a thing. But that's the biggest deep cut for EU there, for you EU nerds out there. So that is a very cool connection. Then episodes 10 to 13, Tale of the Rune Comets, the Rune Games, Across the Rune Sea, and the Frozen Citadel are all the final arc. And this is where we go from, in the middle, in the first one, we had the gang be the bad guys. In the middle one, we had the pirates as the bad guys, and then, like, the people on this prince's planet being the bad guys. And now, in this third arc, we have what you would expect from Star Wars, which is that the Empire are the bad guys. We got this new Imperial officer named Streen. He's got 2 robot hands. He's got a robot eye because stuff happened to him, I guess. He looks, decent, but he's working with this other pirate dude to try to get some runes because they got properties or something. The first time we actually saw the Streen is in the Great Heap episode because he's working with the Great Heap. But yeah, those 4 episodes are fine. They're nothing spectacular. I will say that final episode, the Frozen Citadel, it's another ancient place, and it's got this weird technology. And we got a Mind Harper Sharu situation where R2-D2 becomes a little small, like, ant. Like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Which also happened to Vufi Ra in the first Lando Calrissian book, The Mind Harp of Sharu. They should talk to each other. I think they would get along with the stories they could tell one another. But yeah, by the end of it, though, their new owner leaves, and they're left on the city with the people that they were taking care of. But obviously, at some point, they make their goodbyes and go their own separate ways, because when we begin the comics section, they'll be on their own again. But yeah, I'm going to let a little video play from Matt Wilkins' video about droids and Ewoks, just showing all the EU connections, because it's insane. And he says it better than I ever could. But I really enjoyed the 80s droid show more than I expected to. It was a pleasant surprise. Not all of it really vibed with me, but a lot of it did, especially the Great Heap episode. And not just because of the lore that's behind it. It was just a really good, I thought, well-paced episode. I also never thought I'd hear the room harem in Star Wars, but I've also heard the word infidel, so I think we're 2 for 2 on that. Anyway, until I see you for that comics section, I'll see you later.
Not to the other books and comic books, but to the prequel movies and maybe episode 7. Let me explain. All right, the first one that you heard first in the Droids cartoon series was about the moons of Bogdan. Wait a minute. I remember hearing about the moons of Bogdan. Isn't that where Darth Tyrannus is from? That's what we're told, right? The moons of Bogdan. So the thing is, they got that from the Droids cartoon series. Oh, that's not all. When in episode 1, Qui-Gon says, "Oh yeah, they're pod racing on Malastare, very dangerous stuff." Okay, when was racing on Malastare first discussed? In the Droids cartoon. Seriously, they talk about racing on Malastare. I'm not making this up. It's in the cartoon series. It's blow your mind incredible. Also, you have a character named Kybo Ren. Not Kylo. That's the one that J.J. Abrams did. This is Kybo Ren. Now, I'm going to bet you anything. JJ's around my age. He probably grew up watching this Droids cartoon series. And whoever came up with the name obviously was influenced by the Droids cartoon series. That is such a close name. All they did was change the B to an L. You can't say, yeah, I made it up out of the blue. I didn't know about the cartoon series. No, I think those people did because they're around my age and they were like, Kylo Ren was a cool name, but we already have a Kylo. Let's call him Kylo Ren. Wouldn't it have been awesome if Kylo Ren, instead of being, Han's son, would have been the guy from Droids? In fact, when I first heard the name, I didn't say this on episode 7 videos. I don't think I did. But I was like, wait, Kylo Ren? Kylo. Oh, okay. I thought they're making the guy from Droids canon? What? But it even influenced, in my opinion, the bad guy for episode 7. But wait, that's not all, because in the Droids cartoon series, they go into a 50s diner that is run by a 4-armed Dexter Jettster-like alien. Now, he doesn't look like Dexter Jettster, he's different, but it's a 4-armed alien owning a 50s diner. Exactly what George Lucas put into his movie in episode 2. It was first seen in Droids. I don't even have to reach for any of these connections here. There's actually a planet in Droids where it's full of holes. There are holes in the ground everywhere. People live in these holes. Just like the planet we saw in episode 3. There's so many amazing connections between the cartoon and the prequels. It is mind-boggling. I'm not done yet. You also have a wheel. The wheel that General Grievous rides, the wheel bike from episode 3, you first saw that in the Droids cartoon. Now, what makes this even more amazing is that this actually could fit within the continuity perfectly, because you could say, well, the little upgrades that you see in the cartoon came after episode 3, because this cartoon series takes place, of course, after episode 3 and before episode 4. And so it makes sense it would get some modifications, but it's the same wheel bike. George just took it from Droids and put it in his movie. Another one, the Tung species that was featured as a pod racer in episode 1, he was actually first invented in the Star Wars Droids cartoon series. George took him from the Star Wars Droids cartoon series and put him in episode 1. I'm not done. Ben Burtt, who is the sound designer at Lucasfilm, does all the sound stuff, for R2 and whatnot. He also worked on the cartoon series. And one of the things that he wrote in was a character called Mungo Baobab, which actually, in some of the Shadows of the Empire source books, you will hear about Mungo Baobab, because they were big fans of the Droid series too. In fact, I think on the CD, it has some weird, not EU, but it has a little, interstellar, whatever, something expanded universe that tells you that, hey, this song was first discovered by Mungo Baobab. I was like, wait a minute, what? The guy from Droids is here too? What does he have to do with Shadows of the Empire? Nothing. There's a bunch of fans of Star Wars Droids, and they connected it anywhere. Now, going back to Ben Burtt, he created Mungo Baobab for all these episodes, and he played Baobab in episode 1. He made a guest appearance. Now, not Mungo Baobab, it was one of the Baobabs, like one of his relatives. Folks, there are so many connections from the prequel movies and Droids. It's unbelievable. In fact, watch it for yourself. You may spot more connections than I did. Like I said, I watched this last year and I was just making all these references of all this stuff they pull from episode 1. Now, before you start going crazy and go, wow, why shouldn't Droids be canon? Let me explain a little something. George Lucas actually helped out in the production of Droids. This whole thing that George doesn't care about the expanded universe, it's so silly, because he does care about Star Wars. He does care about it gets rolled out there. He wants it to be quality stuff. And Droids was no, difference. He said, okay, we're going to make a Droids cartoon. I want it to be good. And he's the one that came up with all these ideas for them to use. Later on, George would borrow back those ideas from the cartoon series and put them in the movies. That's how much he loved these. So the cartoon series, and this is ridiculous why Dave Filoni's Clone Wars was the only one to get T-canon status. Why? Because George was heavily involved. Oh, really? George was so heavily involved in Droids, he re-borrowed back all those ideas and put them into his movies, his canon. Unbelievable the significance that Star Wars Droids, a 80s cartoon with a awesome 80s intro music that was just perfect. It screams 80s.